This evening, our topic is transitioning to and from the middle level. And our guests are Dr. Drew Tomlin and Gail Heinemeyer, who will be presenting the heart of the content this evening. Dr. Judy Brew. Dr. Judy Brew is our resident expert on the history of the philosophy of middle level. And she always brings us some great tidbits. We're glad to have Drew, Judy, and Gail with us this evening. Dr. Tomlin's the principal of the Heritage Middle School in Ohio, and Gail Heinemeyer is very active right here in southeastern Pennsylvania, where she was an administrator, principal of Ridley Middle School, and has been very active with AMLE for the last number of years, and is the head of the leadership trainings for AMLE.
Okay, we ready to move on then, Paul?
At this time, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, well,
So, Gail, if you would take it away.
thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with everyone this evening. And I want to know that this is going to be our version of a hybrid presentation because good old Dr. Drew, when he initially made this commitment, his calendar was clear, but things came up, as that often will happen, with his son, who is preparing potentially for a career in baseball. And so Drew filmed his portion of this. So we'll share that with you. So as we walk through this, there'll be some things that I want to talk about, Judy will talk about. We'll see the film from Drew, have some questions and answers, and hopefully share with you some ideas about the whole notion of transitioning. So I thought maybe it would be interesting for us to begin with who is here this evening. And you can participate in the poll in one of two ways. Either go to your phone, and if you have a QR reader on there, you can read that QR code in the left-hand corner, or go to slido.com, and you will see the number that you can enter, 9716, so we get a sense of who is actually here with us this evening. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Fabulous. Now we've got a lot of college and university folks that are here, some teachers. Okay, and those numbers keep shifting around, but it's nice to know that certainly that we do have college and university students, because one of the things you can reflect back upon is perhaps your orientation when you came to college. And what were some of the things that you were concerned about, and what did you need to know in order to get off to a successful start at the college or university level? The same thing is true anytime anybody's making that transition from one comfort zone of education to the next. So we're going to talk about some ways in which we can look at that and some things that can help ease that transition. So our goals for this evening, and the first one I think is really critical. Who are the stakeholders? Because we tend to think of transition in terms of just the students, but it's much more than the students that are involved in the process of transitioning. So think about teachers, administrators, counselors, parents or families, community members, social worker agencies, all of the other folks that somehow are interacting with the kids that are coming into your school. So we want to know not only who they are, but what is it that they are concerned about. We also want to recognize that transition this year is rather unique due to COVID. And chances are most of you have already gone through multiple transitions, potentially from starting a school year totally virtually to transitioning to something that was a hybrid model. And many schools in my area right now in the southeastern corner are coming back face to face within the next few weeks. So there have been lots of opportunities for transitions and things that we need to think about as we're planning for bringing hopefully everybody back into the buildings next September. What is that going to look like? And are there protocols that we're going to have in place that address COVID issues? We want you to understand that there's a value to having a planned transition program, because we know that there is a direct link on how students feel about fitting into that new school and ultimately the level of achievement. We'll look at some activities. We'll give you some suggestions for creating a timeline that you can kind of begin to mark what it is that you do and when you start to do it. Transition is not something that you wait until spring to think about. And of course, as we always do, we want to make sure that you understand that all of the information that we present in our webinars is based in research. And that research traces itself back to the successful middle school, this we believe. And what are the characteristics of a successful middle level school? That, along with the work of the founders, gives us a framework for what we're doing so that as we're talking about transition, all of the things that we're suggesting do come from a research background. Judy, can you tell us a little bit about some of that research?
Yes. Somebody asked me a question in a couple of the other webinars about why we include information on the founders and a little bit about the history of the middle level school. And I just want to share with you that we as a group think it's very important to understand the history of the middle level movement and understand where our founders were coming from. So the reason that we include history is really a two-pronged approach. One is because we want to pay tribute to our founders. I mean, they worked very hard and selflessly to try to give us an idea of how to meet the needs of middle level kids, which had not been done before. It was not done in the junior high model. So we want to pay tribute to them. They have all now passed away. The two who are pictured here, Conrad Tepfer and John Lounsbury, just passed away last year. And so we're trying to keep their visions alive. The second prong to that is that we want to reinforce that the content that we're providing in these webinars is based upon research that started back in the 70s that was directly related to the needs and characteristics of middle level kids. And I wanted to point out that you may find, if you do some reading from any of the founders in middle level education, you'll come across the word transessence. That was a term that was coined by Dr. Donald Eichhorn, who was one of the founders, because he said they're not really early adolescents because the kids are in such a wide range of physical development, and they're not young adolescents because they range in age from 9 or 10 to 15, 16. So he came up with the term transessence to really show that they are in that area of transessence. And they found through their research that it is a very unique stage. And so I wanted to just read, it's on the slide and you'll be able to pull up some of the exact words, but I want to read what they wrote about transition. Discontinuities in learning are especially evident when students transfer from one educational setting to another, such as from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school. Therefore, curriculum, guidance programs, social activities, and other aspects of education should be carefully articulated K to 12. Transessents, already highly sensitive and vulnerable because of the many changes they are experiencing personally, are especially likely to be upset by a shift from one school to another and should receive special consideration at the transition points. So you can see that they realize the volatility of these transessents, and said that it is therefore incumbent upon us to make their transition not only from one school entity to another school entity, but also from grade level to grade level, understanding that as the kids mature, their needs and characteristics also change. So they understood the vulnerability of the kids, and that's why this information on transition is so important. And I might add, as Gail referred to, now we've got transition from Zoom classes to hybrid classes to in-person classes and back to Zoom and back to hybrid. So now these transitions are going to be even more important when they start in whatever form in the fall. So we welcome you all here. Glad that you're interested in this topic, and we're absolutely delighted to have Gail and Drew who live transition. So Gail, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Judy. And again, remember that we like to tie these things back to the successful middle schools, this we believe. If you look at those essential attributes on the left-hand side, one of the things you'll see there is that schools must be responsive. And that truly is critical when it comes to the needs of adolescents as they're making that transition from one building to the next, or certainly even within the building, if you're moving from 6th to 7th grade. How do we respond to the concerns that they have? Because now the environment that they're going into is changing. So that's really an important feature. And most of what we would be talking to with respect to the 18 characteristics really is going to fall under this area of culture and community. So think about the fact that the educators that we have in our buildings value and respect young adolescents. They understand them. They know about the physical changes, the cognitive changes, all of the things that they are experiencing during this time. And they are creating an environment that is going to be welcoming for all of them and inclusive for all of them. So think about, as you're designing transition programs, how are you reaching out to all of those various stakeholders in the student area? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment or so. When it comes to leadership and organization, we think it's important that however you develop that transition program, there is a transition team within your building, and they have developed a shared vision about what transition means for your stakeholders, so that they've had a piece of that. And I would also recommend that you include some stakeholders on that team. So you might want to invite students, both those students that are coming into the building and those students that are leaving, to be part of that committee as you are developing what your vision for transition looks like. I also want you to recognize this rather key point, because by virtue of the fact we promoted everybody from one grade to the other, recognize that the last grade in elementary school, whatever your building configuration is nothing like the first grade in the middle level. If for no other reason than the building may be bigger, and they may be interacting with a greater number of teachers. If they've been in an elementary building where they've pretty much been with one teacher all day long, that model's shifting when they move into the middle school. And the same thing is true at the other end. The move from middle school as an 8th grader into high school, very different in those 2 grade levels. So it really is incumbent upon everybody at both ends of this process to be involved in a rather thoughtful practice about how you're going to prepare these students to be able to do this. So one of the things that I would ask you to think about is, what would be some differences? If you think about your own experience when you were in elementary school, what was something that you were thinking about in terms of, I know this is going to be really different when I move to the next grade, I move to the next building. What are those concerns? So think about asking those kids, because the whole process of transition is a wonderful opportunity to include student voice. They can and should play a very active role in this, not just because they are the group of students that are transitioning, but students that you already have within your school that can serve in a variety of capacities, as mentors, as pen pals, as tour guides, as student ambassadors, whatever it might be. You give your students a great opportunity to really feel that they are making a positive contribution to what goes on in their school. So questions that we want to be thinking about: why do we need this? Why is this even important to do? And how do you go about creating it? And I would suggest to you that it is something that you want to look at on a regular basis. You may have a transition program. You may think this is a great thing. It's served us well, but has it indeed kept up with the times? For example, I think right now in this era, there may not have been things that you've included in transition about how technology is used within the building. What apps do students need to become familiar with? Are you a BYOD, bring your own device, or are you issuing devices? Those are all pieces that maybe when you did your transition program 15 years ago, that was not an issue. But think about, how do you need to update some of those things? You know that you have a successful program if you're sensitive to the anxieties of the students. Keep in mind that now they're really, despite the fact they would like you to not think this, they're very fragile at this time period. They're going through a lot of change. They don't necessarily understand all of the physical changes that are taking place. They have concerns. They will try to bluff through those with some bravado, but they are in fact sensitive to making that change. As I mentioned earlier, you need to have that partnership with all stakeholders and make sure that the buildings are all involved at both ends of that again. So you're collaborating across the district. You want to make sure that everybody has access to information about the next level from an academic standpoint. What is the curriculum? From a social standpoint, what kinds of opportunities do they have for co and extracurricular activities? What types of events might they be able to participate in? And what are the organizational structures at those levels? So you may be coming from that single classroom at the elementary, coming into a teaming experience at middle level, maybe moving to high school where there may be a 9th grade academy, or in some cases a 9th and 10th grade academy. What does that mean? What does that look like? So what we want you to realize is that this whole idea of a transition is for students to become comfortable in whatever that new setting is, and it is an ongoing process. It's not a single event. We don't have that one night and we invite the parents, and that one afternoon and we invite the kids and we do our thing and we're done with it. This is an ongoing process that you constantly want to be taking a look at and redefining how you're doing. I've mentioned a couple times about transition involving various stakeholders. And I want to spend a moment or two talking about students, because what I want you to think is not just about the 5th grade that's coming to 6th grade or the 8th grade that's going to 9th grade, but what are all the subgroups within that student group? Do you have students that are English as a second language students? Do you need to do special things to assist them and their families in the process of transition? Do you have students now that perhaps for the first time are going to be taking school provided transportation? Our school has 7 feeder elementary schools, all of which are designed to be walkable. It's only when the kids are now moving to the middle school that they're getting on the yellow school bus for school provided transportation. So you're going to have that group of students. How do you help allay those fears of getting onto that bus? You're looking at the various subgroups of students, maybe that are coming from a low socioeconomic background and perhaps need to have access to the information for free and reduced lunch. So look at all of those subgroups. Look at your special education students. Do you need to design something from a transition standpoint that addresses their specific needs so that parents understand how it's going to work at the middle school? Who's going to be the case manager? Who's going to be their point of contact? So think about all of the particular subgroups, and they're going to be unique to your own setting. So that's going to vary from school to school, but I just want you to broaden your thought beyond just going, yeah, it's the incoming class. There are lots of dynamics going on within that class. The same is true for parents. You have a diverse population of those parents as well. Think about parents for whom English is not their native language. How do you communicate information to them? How do you communicate information to the parents about attending events at school if transportation is an issue? So think about all the potential needs that your stakeholders have. We could spend a lot of time on those in-school personnel of teachers, administrators, and counselors, but those are things that you probably have developed some systems within your own schools. We can come back to questions if you have later on, but I just want you to think about the fact that it's a broad group of stakeholders that when you're beginning to address this issue. And so with that in mind, at this point in time, if all goes well technology-wise, I'm going to flip you over to what Drew is going to share with us. Now, remember, Drew is the principal of Heritage Middle School in Westerville, Ohio. He has been there now for a couple years. He originally started in Georgia as a language arts teacher, then became an assistant principal, moved into a principal's role. For a few years, worked with the Association for Middle Level Education. He has worked with me for about 15 years on the Leadership Institute, and we have frequently done transition programs together. So let me share with you some thoughts from Dr. Tomlin.
Hey everybody, it's Drew Tomlin, and it's time to talk a little bit about transitions to and from the middle grades, the video version. All right, I wish that I could be there with everybody at PAMLE. I really wish I could. I'm so sorry, but hey, you are in steady hands with Gail Heinemeyer. So this is just my little 2 cents to add to what Gail's talking about. So again, let's go to it. Hope everyone's having a good time. And hey, just in case you're wondering, we just wrapped up the very first day of every single kid being back here face to face here at Heritage Middle School. So in some ways it feels like we're transitioning to middle school. Probably this feels like the 5th first day of school that we've had this year. So transition has taken a lot of different forms in the era of COVID. So there you go. All right, let's check it out. See what the future holds for all of our scholars going forward. All right, so opening act is this. I think this is very important to do. I've done this with my faculty and staff in years past, and that is actually role playing and getting inside the mind of the stakeholders that we're thinking about when it comes to transition. And I really do mean role play, like assign people to different groups and actually have them act out. All right, if you're a student, like what are you thinking about? What are you worried about? What are, that kind of stuff. Families, teachers and staff, other stakeholders, like a lot of times, for instance, we did it in thinking about our bus drivers. And people were like, oh my gosh, I hadn't really thought about how a bus driver thinks about transitioning a 5th grade student to 6th grade, or an 8th grader into high school. Like that kind of stuff can really awaken people's minds, and really to think about like some key questions, right? What are they hoping for? What are their positive aspirations for the students as they come into middle school or go into high school? What are they worrying about? All right, gosh. So yes, the potential challenges that they're thinking about. All right, we assume a lot of times, and sometimes our assumptions are correct, but other times we need to just ask, what are you worried about? What are your concerns? And then I think a big one for middle grades in particular is, what do they think they know about middle school and or high school? And then the question to follow with that one is, what do we need to do to change the narrative? Because a lot of times, particularly in middle school, people's middle school experiences, and I'm speaking of our families and even our teachers and staff, honestly, and other community members, those adults that we serve, their narrative, their story about middle school is obviously painted by their own middle school experience. And so they think that middle school is going to be, for their own child, not a very positive thing. So what do we need to do to change that narrative so they feel more positive about it? All right, so again, as you're thinking about like what to do with your staff right now, in terms of how do you transition students in, I would really encourage some role playing. All right, so I know it sounds kind of hokey, like, oh, we're gonna start acting and being like these people. Really, it works. It really works to get inside their minds. All right, so that's where we begin, just getting inside the minds of the stakeholders affected by transition. All right, so what we typically know and do with transition, but hey, guess what? These are atypical times. So this is the COVID-19 edition of transition. All right, so what we know about transition, guess what? It is a process. It's not just an event. But with that said, events are important. We also know, going down the chart, that every adult should give incoming students and families a positive first impression of the school. But can you guarantee with 110% that everyone's talking good about your school? All right, so how do you get around that? Communication should be clear and consistent between elementary, middle, and high school. So how do you make sure that happens? Not just at specific times of the year, but throughout the year. And transition needs to be engaging and active with positive support. So let's walk through each of these. What do we typically do? And then what do we do in atypical times? All right, so the first one is, with transition being a process, typically we figure out, what do we want to achieve and why. That's always important, the why behind it. And then we work with all these stakeholders, teacher leaders, administrators, coordinators, at all these different levels to talk about, hey, what events are we going to run? What meetings are we going to do? In May, we typically do like what we call moving up night, where we have our 5th grade students come into the building, check it out, walk around, meet me, meet the other administrators and counselors and teachers and stuff like that. In July, we have in the past done a transition camp for our students, where they came in and they saw the school, they did activities and that kind of stuff. And then August, we did a 6th grade only, with 6 or 8 only days, the first day of school, all right, which was very successful. All right, so clearly this year is different. So we got to change how, when, and where the events and meetings happen. And quite honestly, we leaned a lot on videos and social media. So I don't know about you, but I've become like a real, I don't want to say aficionado, but I've been a very video. All right, so yeah, those kind of media tools are very, very critical to making a positive message. All right, next one is every adult should do these things, provide a positive first impression of your school. So always providing clear messages and messaging for teachers and staff. All right, so yes, putting your vision and mission statements out there, your goals for the year, your mottos, and your branding messages. So I know that like school and businesses are sometimes diametrically opposed. Like people don't like to think about, you know, school being run like a business, and in a lot of ways it shouldn't, but I really believe in branding and making sure that, gosh, you know, we that our people know our brand. Like as soon as they think of Heritage Middle School, they think of keep your eyes on the prize and seize every day with kindness, excellence, safety, and Husky pride. They know that our motto is Husky strong, all that kind of stuff. All right, so and then, you know, during a typical year, you're visible, accessible, available, and responsive. Okay, you always do that. But then in an atypical time, how do you do that? So it is the same, but virtually. Always communicate regularly, enthusiastically. It's something that people need to be able to count on. So way back starting in March, the very first March when the world kind of imploded and we were thinking about, okay, how do we keep this message going so our families know us, they hear us, they recognize our voices, they see what our school is like, even though they can't be here. We put out a weekly video every single week, and everybody knew what it was about. And it was not just information, but it was activities they could do on the home front. And we've kept that going even throughout this school year when it was remote learning, blended learning, all that kind of stuff. So that kind of consistency is key. All right. Let me see if I can move myself. Yeah, I can. All right. Next up is communication should be clear and consistent, kind of what I just said. Making documentation about at-promise and at-risk students evidence of feeder schools. That's something that we always do to try to make sure that people are all on the same page with the scholars that we're going to be sending and the scholars that we're going to be receiving. And we schedule meetings about those at-promise, I call them at-promise, at-promise or at-risk students. Of course, in a COVID time, you can do shared Google Docs and Google Meetups if you use that, or Zoom calls, or Schoology, or whatever you do. But of course, be careful what is shared, recorded, and written down. All right, so everything can be public record. So I always like to say, just be careful of what you put out. All right, transition needs to be engaging, active, and with positive support. All right, so, and we'll get into an example of our transition camp and what we thought about with that. But transition activities need to appeal to students' physical, behavioral, and social tendencies. So that's where we had school visits, transition camps, you know, one grade only, that kind of stuff. So what do we do in atypical times? We do the same things, but so for our school, we use web. All right, so where everybody belongs. So we have our web leader, our web coordinators and leaders to encourage students to connect to students, making those phone calls. So our web leaders make phone calls to our incoming 6th grade students, set up Google Meets with their teachers as well. So they've taken the web concept that would normally be face-to-face with activities and bonding and that kind of stuff and turn it into a virtual experience. All right. Okay. So let's see what else. So this is an example. Let me move myself back down here. This is an example of my Bitmoji office. So once we really started to go, you know, the district announced that we were going to be 100% remote to start the year. I was like, well, gosh, we really need to have some things. Just, you know, if we do come back and we're able to use lockers, let's say, for instance, you know, you need to practice opening a combination lock. So if you haven't ever done a Bitmoji office, I would suggest you do it. So every month I try to change this so it goes with the times and what's going on in our school and everything like that. But each of these is linked to something. So like I said, practicing a combination lock, doing mindfulness and restfulness activities, learning our school dance, going to the school website, even getting like the characteristics of young adolescents. These are things that we felt like, all right, kids can't come and see our building right now. They can't come meet me face to face, but I know that classroom Bitmojis or Bitmoji classrooms are a big deal for a lot of folks, but Bitmoji offices can also be kind of fun too. All right. Okay. All right. I know I'm doing a lot of talking. I appreciate your patience. All right. So other things about transitions. Transitions work better when there are structures that are familiar for students and families. That's one thing we know. Transitions should involve curriculum conversations. It's helpful to know what school is like at every level, and transition works better when all stakeholders have a voice in the process. All right, walking through this. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go through what we can do in atypical times. So teaming, interdisciplinary teaming. All right, I know it's probably part of the conferencing, what you guys are talking about. Interdisciplinary teaming is so critical in the middle grades. We're fortunate enough that we have it in our building. It's only in the 6th grade right now. The district is phasing it back in, but at least in the 6th grade, our 6th grade students have teams. So we make sure we continue teaming and ensure that teams continue to communicate with students and families as a team. So a lot of their communication has had to be virtual, clearly not so much face-to-face. And we also have a student mentoring program and make sure that it's run and mentors are following through. So really that's our web program to go there. All right. In terms of curriculum conversations, it's virtual, but what we're really doing this year is focusing on power standards, really identifying like what is the critical stuff that students need to know as 6th graders, you know, and as 8th graders going up, like what's essential for them to know as 8th graders transitioning into high school. And I think that's really important stuff. It's hard work because people, you know, want to cover it all. They feel like, oh my gosh, how can I leave out this unit, or how can I leave off this standard? This standard is so important, or it's one of my favorite things I love to teach. But really focusing on that kind of stuff and common lessons and assessments in addition to project-based learning. How do you make activities engaging and not just, all right, we're going to sit here and cover these standards? But that's part of the transition process too. Thinking about curricularly what's important for an incoming 6th grader to know. All right. In terms of knowing what school looks like at every level, I also think this is important. So looking at like, all right, so what does elementary look like? What does high school look like? And how do we know that? So normally we would go to those schools and visit those schools and visit their events when we can, stuff like that. But that's not as easy right now. So what do you do instead? So at least ask your elementary and middle and high school administrators to share calendar events that would kind of, you know, shine a light on student life in their building so they can kind of see. And that way you as a middle school, you know, principal administrator can say, hey, my 8th grade students, what you're going to want to know about at the high school that you're going to be going to next year is right about this time they're doing X, Y, and Z activities. You're going to want to make sure that you're involved in all those things. All right, so sharing those calendar events. Ask your elementary and high school administrators if you or your middle school students can add or write a column, you know, create video messages and newsletters, documents and stuff like that. That's particularly powerful for middle school students to, you know, send those messages down to the elementary school levels so they can kind of see like, oh, this is what an 8th grader sounds like. Oh, they're not so scary after all. All right. And the last one here, let me move myself over here. The last one is transition works better when all stakeholders have a voice in the process. Really helping them set academic and behavioral goals, and them meaning students and families. They've got to set those academic and behavioral goals. And also, you know, establishing a transition planning committee that includes people from elementary, middle, and high school. Now we're talking right now, it's March 2021. Testing's about to happen pretty soon, possibly, maybe, sort of, kind of. So when do you fit those conversations in? That's the key. That's the secret sauce right there. Like, these are important conversations to have across the grade levels, but gosh, by golly, when do you fit them in? All right. And we have talked about, we have yet to develop, but we're talking about like creating and sharing a Google form with all students and families that ask them to set goals. And that way we can collect that data and say, all right, that way we know that kid, we know what they want to learn about. And that way it's also a little more private than in times past when it's like a paper form that gets to a teacher that a teacher's got to share, or that an administrator's got to share. But a Google form could be something that, you know, families can kind of fill out at home and give some real time and thought to. All right, let's see what's next up. Those are the things we typically do. but then, what do we do at atypical times? All right. One thing that is something that's a non-negotiable is how we collect data about transition. So I'm a huge fan of qualitative data. I like quantitative too. Don't get me wrong. I like numbers. I like graphs. I like charts, but qualitative data, the stories and the narratives and the, anecdotes and stuff like that. Like those are important. That's important data to collect. So we're going to go a little low tech here. And if this were a staff meeting, we would do this on chart paper. Yeah, we can do that face to face now. We can use chart paper again, right? We just can't share markers probably without wiping them down. Oh, well. All right. So what you would start with, and this is a really powerful protocol if you haven't done something like this. You start with a circle, right? And you have everyone draw a circle on their chart paper or even on their own individual paper, and they have to fill in the circle with the answer to that question. What do you believe about transition? What should it achieve? What should it do? All right, so you have people fill that in, all right? And the reason why is because that is the why. You've got to start with the why, like everybody says, right? Like, what's the why behind transition? What do we really feel like transition should do at our school? Because some people will say, 8th grade transition to 9th grade. Some people will say, you know what? It's just about getting them ready for high school academically, all right? Whereas other people in your building will say, well, it's really more about like their behavioral readiness or their social readiness. So that's why it's important to collect that anecdotal data about what do you believe about transition. All right. And then on this side is they have to, draw this shape and then fill in the answer to that question. What is your school doing well for transition right now? If this is what we believe in the middle, what are we doing right now to fulfill that why or that vision? All right. So if we do believe that we're just getting kids ready for high school academically, what are we doing right now? That's good. All right. And then, of course, after that is the other side, which is what does our school need to do more of in the future? If this is our why in the middle, we've identified what we're doing well, then what do we need to do more of in the future? All right. Now, as you can see, the shape of this is a bow tie. And if there's anybody who's like, oh, what does this all mean? Like, they've got to understand the physics of a bow tie, right? The most important part of a bow tie is the knot in the middle, all right? Because the knot in the middle is what holds it together. And if it's too loose, then it's all going to fall apart. If it's too tight, it's going to hurt people, all right? But it's got to be just right where it's tight, but it's a little bit flexible, but it helps us identify what we do well and what we need to do more of, but always has to come back to the why. If we start with the what we're doing, who's doing it, where's it happening, when's it's happening, then we're going to lose it all together. All right. You can also look at this as like a, airplane propeller if you want to, and that the most important part of an airplane propeller is the middle part because it helps to hold the, they're not rudders. What are they? Hold those parts together. But anyways, collect that data. Do it at a staff meeting. I found it to be very powerful, but that's that right there. All right. Next up, this is something that, again, what we typically do and then what we can do in the future. This is about our transition camp. All right. So if there were time, I would click on each of these. If you want these items, I can share them with you. But this was an opportunity for 6th graders to get to know the building a little bit more. So we had them come in July, and we did a pre-camp survey, so we knew we were meeting their needs. And then we put them into groups, and we mixed it up. So we have 5 feeder elementary schools that feed into our building. So we mixed them up so that way they could, experience, school here with other kids from different schools. And then we had camp events. And then we did a post-camp survey so they could, say like, oh yeah, now I know the school better. All right. So, and then we also, on the in 2019, we had 6th grade only day, which was really super cool. And like I said, it was about and run with a program called Web. So if you haven't done Where Everyone Belongs, I can't, it is awesome. It is awesome. All right, so basically our web leaders are our 8th graders and they are our ambassadors. And what happens first is they get trained up. The web coordinators meet with the web leaders. So this year, we did 3 Google Meetups with web leaders to do this. All right, so it was all virtual. And then the web leaders reached out to their incoming 6th graders via phone to introduce themselves. So that took some training. If you think that 8th graders just naturally know how to talk to 6th graders on the phone, it ain't that natural. So you got to train them up on that. And then at the time we explained like the 6th grade only day to them. But this year it was more done through Google Meets and Schoology and stuff like that. But it really gave a lot of our 6th graders somebody they could count on in the building. And they all had the same kind of green. It was a green web leader shirt. But again, it's not about the program as much as it is the people. So we had to have the right coordinators. We had to have the 6th grade teachers on board, and we had to have the right kids too. So it's about the people, not just the program. All right. So those are some things that we typically do. All right. In thinking about our transition camp, we also used another piece of data, and that was looking at our young adolescents. I mean, that's what really should all begin anyways. So we looked at the physical and cognitive, moral, psychological, and social emotional parts of our kids, right? And so in our camp, we wanted to make sure we had minute to win it games, right? So rotating different stations, we did a school scavenger hunt. Now, in terms of like COVID times, you know, we could do a virtual scavenger hunt where, you know, we could set up some class, you know, a Bitmoji classroom or a Bitmoji office and have kids click on certain objects and do a scavenger hunt like that, or use QR codes that they could scan from a distance and go to different places like that. All right. So, but something to appeal to their physical part, you know, just, you know, get their legs moving and stuff like that. That is more challenging in the virtual space, but it's doable. Cognitive. So that's not so hard to do from a virtual space, you know, trivia and about school and curriculum. We did think, all right, do we need to add interest and learning style inventories to this as well with the next time we do a transition camp? All right. The moral part, we did have our students meet with our school resource officer and our 6th grade lead teachers about decision-making in the middle grades, decisions and challenges that they may face here at school. Not to paint our school with a negative brush, like, oh my gosh, you know, Heritage is a rough school, you better be prepared. But just more like, hey, what are some things you're gonna, you know, probably be deciding about as a middle school student? And then we thought, gosh, would we add a service learning component, working with, you know, local food bank? Maybe they could bring in some bags and some food, and kids could actually do some service while they were here. Psychological part and social emotional part are very similar. So doing team building, we know we wanted to do that. We know we wanted to do a get to know you activity at the same time, so we could focus on not just the, you know, the ego part of it, but also to focus on like how we can come together as a team and as a small community. And then we also thought, gosh, we really need to add some self-reflection and self-assessment at the end. That felt a little bit rushed. So this camp was from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And we had kids like rotate to different stations throughout it. And like I said, if you want the full schedule, I can give you the full schedule. It was really fun. And once again, it was about the people. I just am very fortunate to work with teachers that rock. And so they came in, volunteer, didn't get paid extra or anything like that. I fed them a little bit of lunch, but they came in and they ran the activities. You know, I had the activities written up with what was supposed to happen. I had the materials for the activities, all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty much plug and play, but it was about the people behind the program. So that's the key there. And everybody in our 6th grade team in particular is invested in making it successful. All right. So, but using the characteristics of young adolescents as, hey, what are we really doing to meet our students' needs? All right. So now the question is, here it is, March 2021. What are you going to do now with what you typically do in these atypical times? What's your next year going to look like? And if your next year is going to look different, then how are you going to do things differently? Or if your school is going to go back face-to-face full-time, all students, how are you going to start transitioning those students in? And what events can you start planning for now? Or are you waiting for your district or school system to give you the green light on all of this? You know, that's a tough spot to be in. All right, and then in this presentation, which I can share with lots of other people, if you want me to share it with you, I can. There's transition information and docs from AMLE, position paper from AMLE and NAESP, about transition, and then tips for families. And then I even put a little thing on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, I really, really, really impress upon you to check out Twitter. So all I had to do was type in, let me see what this is gonna go. We'll see. All right, so here comes the tweeter machine. And as you can see, all I typed in at the top, I typed in middle school transition right there. All right, and then here comes all of this stuff about middle school transition. All right, so, you know, I've got this recommendation for a book. I've got, you know, pictures down here. I've got an ad that doesn't mean anything. So again, lots of resources just on Twitter when you type in middle school transition. So again, Twitter is not just a place to follow politics and all that kind of stuff, but it actually is a great place to get educational resources. All right, so with that said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Drew Tomlin. It is, you know, a joy and a pleasure, and I wish I could be there with you guys in the virtual space. And I hope you're having a great time at PAMLE and with GAIL. That's right, Gail Heinemeyer in the house. So again, reach out anytime. I should have put my contact information on there somewhere, but I'm not that bright. So if I didn't do that, maybe Gail will share it with you. Anyways, have a great day and enjoy. Bye.
So Drew shared a lot of information with you, and I want to go back and kind of hit some of those ideas, and rest assured that if you want to have access to any of the information that Drew shared, email me, I can get that to you. We started with the idea that each one of those groups has concerns. One of the things that we would both impress upon you is, where are those people getting their information? So Brew talked about branding your building, getting your message out, creating your narrative. One is people sharing stories about middle level that are the horror stories, because those often tends to be the ones that get spread throughout the community and blow up on Facebook and things of that nature. You want to make sure that you are the ones that are providing the information about what's going on in your school. And this can also be true with your teachers at the lower level, because one of the things we discovered early on was that we had fifth grade teachers that were almost striking the fear of God into kids about moving to sixth grade, because they didn't understand what it was that we were doing and how we did it. So one of the things I would suggest to you is, if you're having the sixth or the fifth grade students come up for an orientation program, bring the fifth grade teachers as well, and let them have an opportunity to really understand what is middle level all about. Drew talked a little bit about this and how we plan those things to respond to these characteristics. And that again goes back to the idea that what we want to do is research-based, because we know that if we address those concerns, those kids are going to be more successful in the long run. It's not only that developmental transition, but it's also the whole different environment of what middle school looks like compared to elementary, or if they're moving to high school. It's a completely different structure. Yes, it's school, but it's going to look real different at each level, and the kids need to be comfortable with that. So again, I'm going to ask you if you would like to get out your trusty little phone, use the QR code. Using one word, what was your biggest concern when you were entering middle? So either scan the QR code or go to slido.com 9716 and put in that one word. Let's see what kind of responses we get. So we'll give you a few seconds to do this. The ever popular lockers and friends. So you can begin to see some of the things that people are concerned about, because it's different from what they were doing in the elementary level. I think one of the things, as I talk to most sixth graders, lockers seem to be an overwhelming issue for kids. And there are ways that you can help address those concerns. One of the things I would suggest is have some of your student leaders film some videos about opening lockers, post them on your website. Create a section on your district website or your school website with frequently asked questions about transition, And then you can create these little instructional videos that would be there, and people would get a chance to look at that and see, how do I overcome that issue with lockers? So it's interesting as you see some of those things that come up as to, we think, and by we, I mean the adults, that the things that the kids really want to know is what's on this list. They want to know about the curriculum. They want to know about the academics. How much homework are they going to have? How hard are the tests going to be? They want to know about safety and discipline. Are they going to have problems with older students? Are the 8th graders going to stuff them into lockers? How do they get along with teachers and administrators? And maybe this is the first time that they have a school counselor. Fortunately, that there are more and more elementary schools that are bringing on school counselors, but that's not always the case. So that might be a whole new individual. The kids have no idea, nor do parents, what those people do. And they're certainly concerned about relationships, and then just kind of those general operational things. Here's what they really want to know. And the locker seems to come out time and time again. So you see some of the concerns that those kids have, and I like to consider them as the 5 L's, with lonely spelled with the Y where it's supposed to be, not where it is there. But think about these things that are issues for those kids. How am I going to make friends? Because also when you're thinking about transition and student subgroups, think about students that are new to your district as an incoming 6th grader. All right. Particularly if you're in an area perhaps where students are attending a private or a parochial school, perhaps up through 5th grade, and then they're going to shift over to middle level. So yes, they've lived in your district, but they haven't attended one of your elementary schools. So think about, how are you going to help those students assimilate, as well as those who move in over the summer that have not been in your district at all? How are they going to make friends? What about lunchtime? How do you set up your cafeteria? Do you have assigned seats? Am I going to have some place that I'm going to get to go to sit? Am I going to have to fight my way through the cafeteria to find a place to sit? Think about that from the kids' perspective and how overwhelming that can be. And if you're really worried about what are you going to do in that 25, 30 minutes you have for lunchtime, that's probably something you've worried about all morning long, and then you're going to suffer the ill effects in the afternoon. So think about how you're structuring these students getting used to the cafeteria. What do they do if they're late? That doesn't tend to be the same problem in elementary as it is at middle level, but that is a big issue for middle level kids. What are your concerns about lateness, not only to the building in the morning, or you're coming late because your alarm clock didn't work and you missed the school bus and you're getting to school, but it's already 30 minutes into the school day. They want to know, what are the consequences of that? How do I deal with that? Do I just walk into the building and go to class, or is there a procedure? What do I do if I'm lost? As I mentioned earlier, my district had 7 feeder elementary schools, all of which were 1 or 2-story buildings. They came to my middle school, a 5-story building. It was very easy to get lost. So one of the best things with that is the idea of the scavenger hunt that Drew talked about as part of transition camp. We just set things up throughout the building and let kids go loose on their own and find their way around. And they became very comfortable with finding the shortcuts, finding the easiest ways to go from place to place within that building. So think about how they're going to navigate that building. And again, I'm going to say this is a great opportunity for student voice. Let your student ambassadors serve as guides, take kids on a tour of the building. We even let the students take the parents on the tour of the building so that they had an opportunity really to show off, and they will not let you down. Those students take pride in the fact that they're being able to do this. They want to show their school off in the best light, and it does give them a sense of belonging. A little bit about teachers and counselors. Absolutely, they need to know the curriculum and the expectations at each level. We suggested that perhaps if it were possible, and this isn't true everywhere, that you have a meeting on a regular basis, that those teachers from 5th to 6th and 8th to 9th could meet several times and talk about what it is that's taught at each level. Or a teacher exchange program where we've actually done a shadow day and we've split in service time, had some of the 8th grade teachers go up to the high school, some high school teachers come down to the middle school, and really kind of have a chance to see what it was like to walk in the other person's shoes so that they have an understanding of what you're doing at each level, and they have a better sense of how they can prepare the kids when they go. Parents and families, we also know, certainly need support. Drew mentioned a lot of ways in which we've been doing this now through social media, using videos, using communication through your website, lots of ways to get that message out there. And we know in particular, parents, as their child is coming back into the building, are going to have concerns that are related to COVID. What's the issue with masking? How are we dealing with social distancing? What happens if a student doesn't feel well during the day? Are they required to have their temperature taken? What are we doing with a hybrid or virtual instruction? Parents are going to have all of those concerns that they probably never experienced as students themselves. So how are you going to communicate that information to them? Don't overwhelm them. Maybe chunk 2 or 3 topics at a time. And again, I'm going to suggest doing those little informational videos, 5, 6, 7 minutes, put a little topic out there. And the best part of that is you can store all of that information and use it when you have a new student or family that comes to the district. You can tweak it for the next year. You've got your work done, but now it's going to be easier for you to be able to replicate year after year. Also, you want to take information from feeder schools, if they have PTAs or PTOs. One of the things that we did was after our general orientation program at the middle school, we then followed it up where I went to every elementary building for one night and met with the parents there when they were more comfortable perhaps asking questions in that smaller setting. So utilize those parent groups. There is a link down there at the bottom to a blog written by Jen Court. Some of you may be familiar with Jen. She has some great stuff on tips for parents when it comes to that transition process. We've already mentioned some of these things, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are things that everybody can do. It's just how are you going to go about doing them? One of the things we say is that transition team, get student and parent input, collect your information, get that survey. How can you involve students, families, and staff from both schools? Think about activities that can be done, create that calendar, and measure what it is that you're doing. Is your program successful? So your transition team might include people representing all of these different areas. And notice too that we have there, if you have after school programs within your community, church or faith-based groups, perhaps, community agencies, local businesses, that you may want to have them involved because they too have an interest in how kids are moving through the school system. So think about who's on that transition team. Create that plan. And one of the things that we've looked at is using this format. What's the activity? What's the timeline? What do I need to be able to pull this off? Is it going to cost us something? And how is that funding going to be covered? Who do we need to have involved in this? And then importantly, evaluating it. Create that plan throughout the year so that there are activities that you may be plugging in on this form for each month and each stakeholder. And you'll realize if you start thinking about what it is you already do, you have a lot of this that's already in place. But think about being able to do that. And we talked about the transition camp idea. Both Drew and I would be more than willing to share with you how we have gone about setting that up and ways in which to do that. But it is one of the single most effective things that we did in our middle school. Thinking about the effectiveness of the program, here are some of the things that you might look at. And I know this may sound far-fetched, but student achievement on standardized tests. If they're comfortable, they feel they belong, they feel they've been valued, they feel they can participate, you're going to see that they're going to be willing to put forth the effort that will translate into higher achievement. What are your retention rates? How many students are you keeping at a grade level? Hopefully none, but if that happens, is that something that you have an overwhelming number? Not so much at middle level, but dropout rates for the high school. One of the things we know is that those students who become disengaged from the process of education start to do that at middle level, but they can't drop out because of age, so they're just biding their time. But take a look then when they get to the high school, what is the dropout rate? What are your numbers of failures? What's the level of engagement that you have with kids in activities? How active are your parents? How are they involved in your school programs? And constantly be getting the feedback, collecting the data that we talked about. Some other things that you might think about. One of the fabulous things that our district has done is a welcome walk. And in the summertime, again, this may look a little bit different this year, but we take all of the incoming students that are going into 9th grade. They are divided up among the faculty. Little tote bags are prepared, and we have faculty members who visit the home of every single incoming 9th grade student. What a great way to have them feel that they are really welcomed in the community. An ice cream social, visitation times, let parents ride the bus so they get a sense of it. Pen pals, maybe using 5th with 7th grade students. And certainly we talked about the idea of having those videos. Students have a successful transition and an increased chance for achievement when all of those things that we are doing, the programs, the policies, the practices, are based on what we know is best for young adolescents. And that's why we keep circling back to those ideas, that that is really what will have the impact for you to have that successful transition program. It's going to require collaboration. It's going to require a focus on a personalized program that, again, addresses the needs of all the stakeholders. So we thank you for spending some time with us. If you do have questions, we'll be happy to hang around a little bit. If you'd like to either post them in the chat, or if Bruce or Paul want to guide some things. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to bring us to an end for the evening.
Well, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Drew and Judy, for your, sharing your expertise on middle level and these transitions. You presented a ton of information that's very valuable. And just so everyone knows, this session was recorded, so you're going to be able to go back onto the PAMLE website and check this out. And you should be able to see all of these slides, because you got some great ideas of some things that you could do. And don't forget to, if you need to talk to Drew or you need to talk to Gail, reach out to at least PAMLE. If you can't, reach out to them and we'll connect you with Gail or Drew, because they would be great resources for you all to talk and listen to. So I want to thank you for that. I want to remind you, and I'd also like to thank you all for being here tonight. And many of you have stayed the entire time, which is awesome. And thank you so much for that. We do have our next webinar. It's on April 14th at 7 p.m. And this is going to be about the essential classrooms, talking about music and art and tech ed and family consumer science and PE, where we're going to be teaching the essential courses in a virtual hybrid model. So join us on April 14th as we set that up, and we'll be getting information on that as well. And we hope that this will be an interactive session where participants will be able to share ideas as well. So thank you all again. If you want to stay and ask questions, you may be able to do that in the web, in the chat box, and we'll be more than happy to stick around and answer some questions for you. So thank you all so much. Have a great night. Are there any questions that anyone has? I haven't seen any yet. Yeah, I'm going to say you did a great job. And we don't have any questions right now. There's 9 people still here, but what great information. And, your transition camp, as I told you, and it was one of the most successful things we ever did. And it was awesome. And the web piece, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say that is one of the things that I actually stole it from Bailey Middle School in Austin, Texas. I like to give them the credit for the whole idea. But one of the things that we found successful was that once that was up and running and word of that got out, I actually spent some time going to several other middle schools and helping them get those things started. So that is something certainly, if people want some additional information, they want to try that idea. Don't know what it might look like this summer, depending upon what the circumstances are, but we could certainly do that.
It's really good stuff. And that web program, our high school does that, where they create these web leaders and they work with the 8th graders. And so they do a day where our 8th grade goes over to the high school and spends a day there. and they're with their web leaders for that day. And then they connect in the summer, and then they have summer activities that they go through. And they're there for them through the first whole semester, where they can answer questions for these 8th graders. It's a great program. It really is.
I think too, one of the key points that both Drew and Gail brought up that we tend to forget is that about the parents. We really want the parents on our side. And if you think about it, one of the characteristics of middle-level kids is they're starting to pull away from their parents. And very often parents view that as the schools trying to initiate that, to kind of usurp their power. And so in many of the schools that I work with, we set up parent courses on the needs and characteristics of middle-level kids so that they could understand the changes that their kids were going through. Because when they were young, it was a totally different time. Now with not only COVID, but technology, the parents need to be able to understand the kids and understand how the school is reacting to help the kids.
Right.
So
And
that's important.
one of the comments that's here, Susan says, this is important to help us with SEL as well. And that is truly an excellent observation, because
Yes.
so much of what we're doing in terms of having kids feel comfortable in that school is really addressing the social emotional piece. And we've sort of hammered this theme throughout all of the webinar series this year, that now more than ever, it's really looking at that Maslow before Bloom piece, that we need to know that kids are having their needs met, that they feel comfortable, that they're able to feel that this is a welcoming environment, that where they're going to be supported, that it's okay to make a mistake, and it's all right that they can learn and grow from that. And it does address a lot of that social emotional piece that allows everything else to flow from that. So that's really critical.
Well, everybody's left us. We're the only ones
Yep.
left.
We're the only ones who